Hey, this is Blondeguygamer, and today's game for this They Made a Sequel is the follow-up to one of the finest turn-based strategy RPGs I've played, Valkyria Chronicles. Originally released back in 2008 on the PlayStation 3 by Sega, Valkyria Chronicles is a game in which a fictional European continent of Europa is undergoing a second war between the Atlantic Federation and the Imperial Alliance. However, instead of either of those factions, we play as a militia squad in the neutral country of Gallia, which is being invaded by the Empire for its rich sources of Tiberium, Ragnite, the world's fuel and medical resource that is starting to run scarce elsewhere. As tank commander of Leader Squad 7 Welcome Gunther, it is your job to recruit and outfit your squad and undertake strategic missions to fend off the invading army. During these, the game utilizes a system called Blitz, which stands for Battle of Live Tactical Zones. Essentially, the game is turn-based with a set amount of command points per turn to use on your various squad members. Once selected, the view switches from a top-down map view to third person where you can move your character as much as the action point bar will allow and perform an action such as firing a weapon to take care of opposing forces. This combination of turn-based and real-time unit movement is what truly makes Valkyria Chronicles stand out among the other strategy RPGs. The gameplay is not only good, but the story and character-driven narrative is well written, and the setting is a nice fantasy twist of World War II influences along with the coveted Valkyrian race, which you'll learn all about since it is in the title after all. Not to mention the game looks and sounds great with its distinctive canvas graphical engine and the stellar orchestrated soundtrack by Hitoshi Sakamoto, who also did the music for the Final Fantasy Tactics series among other games. Valkyria Chronicles is one of, if not the best new Sega IP brought in the last gaming generation. If you haven't played it and want to, then you don't have to track down a PS3 copy as the game was released on Steam late last year with all the DLC and be able to play it on high resolutions, provided you have a decent gaming PC. Naturally, there was a lot of potential for this to be expanded onto a series, and thankfully a sequel was made and released in 2010 on the PSP. Yeah, this is another one where it went to a handheld. Now, sequels from consoles to handhelds can work, such as Metroid 2 on the Game Boy or Akami on the DS, the latter of which I did cover before. And I do like the PSP, even if the DS sold way more and arguably has more memorable games. A trend that continues with the Vita and 3DS, but I digress. This still doesn't deter those preferring a sequel on the PlayStation 3 instead, so the question is, why make Valkyria Chronicles 2 on the PSP? Well, here's the thing, even with critical acclaim, the first game wasn't a huge seller, especially at first, but did gain momentum later on when it was resold at a lower price, making it considered a sleeper hit here. Despite that, the producer of the series said in an interview on Famitsu that the next game would be on the PSP to allow a broader spectrum of users to discover and enjoy what makes the series special. You might be wondering why shift the demographic of the PSP users of all things, but keep in mind that in Japan, the PSP, while still dwarfed compared to the likes of the Nintendo DS, generally did better than the PlayStation 3 around that time and had a bigger user base. Mostly due to games like the Monster Hunter series and Sega's own success with the Phantasy Star portable games, so they decided to go that route for Valkyria Chronicles as well. Unfortunately, it seemed that Sega jumped the gun before realizing that the first game eventually did the best in North America surprisingly, and the sequel suffered in sales because of that, most obviously in this region. The PSP over here was quickly on the decline by the time 2 came out, while the PS3 gained superiority over the handheld, further cementing that the sequel would have likely sold better if they stuck to the PlayStation 3, at least in North America. And the kicker is it didn't even sell more than the first game did in Japan, so that kinda backfired. In other words, Sega pretty much shot themselves in the foot with this IP by shifting over to the PSP, though ironically, since I did have a PSP before PlayStation 3, I played the demo of 2 before the first game, and when I did eventually get Valkyria Chronicles, I picked it up using at EB Games, and the clerk at the counter commented on how good the game was. In small talk, I mentioned that I played the second game's demo, and no joke, the game store employee didn't know there was a sequel. And that was one of my main inspirations for making reviews of sequels like these. So without further ado, let's see how this one holds up on the PSP. Valkyria Chronicles 2 takes place 2 years after the events of the first game, where the Second Europa War between the Empire and Federation is still going, but Gallia is at peace being a neutral country again after stopping the Empire's invasion into them. Or it would be if not for a rebellion force, called the Gallian Revolution Army led by the aristocrat Garcinal family, starting a civil war within Gallia over the revelations of the now Archduchess Princess of the nation Cordelia and their determination to wipe out the Darksons, a race of dark purple-haired people in the series that are often discriminated for supposedly causing a calamity in ancient times. We are then introduced to our main protagonist Avon Hardens, being informed by Landseal Military Academy Professor Brixham that Yvonne's older brother, Leon, has died while on a mission for the Academy. After a quick tutorial battle with rebels, Yvonne decides to enroll at Landseal to find out what he can about his brother. Once there, he meets Cosette, who originally wanted to be a medical student but enlisted in Landseal instead, and Darkson Zeri, both of which join Yvonne for a trio of main characters in this game. After passing preliminary exams and field exercises, Yvonne is assigned to Class G by the school's headmaster. Wait, Class G? Squad 7, Class G, I see what the game did there. Once Yvonne starts classes, a snobby stacked pink-haired girl named Juliana, who is head of Class A, berates G for not having a Class G representative. Yvonne, since he is the main protagonist after all, is promptly elected the chair of Class G, and soon realizes that this class is apparently the lowest regarded in the academy. That's certainly encouraging. It makes it very clear that one of the story arcs is proving that this class has what it takes to be the best despite being bluntly portrayed as a bunch of losers at first. If you couldn't tell by now, Valkyria Chronicles 2 in terms of its setting and characters plays out much like any given high school anime. Just about every stereotype and trope you can think of from those is in this game. Most are just played for laughs in between battles, but it's too cliched for my taste. Granted, the first Valkyria Chronicles certainly had moments that made it quite apparent it was an anime-style game, even getting an actual anime adaptation no less, but too cranks the anime aspects to overly predictable levels. The only thing missing is a piece of toast in Yvonne's mouth when he runs late to class on his first day, and on the subject of Yvonne, he is one of the most cliché JRPG protagonists, even more so than the likes of Reed from Tales of Eternia, because we all want the strong-willed but not too bright male lead that likes to eat and sleep for the millionth time, right? The other characters don't fare much better in originality, because that is your typical cheery anime girl and Zuri is the stern, logical rival to Yvonne, or the Spock to Yvonne's Kirk if you will. Brixham, who's Class G's teacher, isn't afraid to say his students are terrible, but is still your standard professor character and is pretty much your commanding officer. Then there's Ali S, this game's Valkyrian, who unfortunately is portrayed more like a lolly magical girl than an all-powerful warrior, and oh for crying out loud, why is she wearing that? It's bad enough there's fan service scenes with 17-year-olds in this game, even that's pushing it makes the beach chapter from the first game tame in comparison, but this is taking it too far for me.
Okay, I know the reason for this is pretty much just Japan, but this is a 13-year-old girl. I can't help but feel a little uncomfortable with that. In fact, let me just cover up that last image with something more appropriate. There we go.
As for the rest of the classmates and characters, they're pretty much a mixed eccentric bunch of all types you might expect. So naturally, when this game gives the option to name my squad, I decided on Animu G. Yeah, that's all I could come up with, and you're limited to 6 letters. At least I didn't go with something even dumber like G-Unit or something. Thankfully, the game does remember the main plot is rebels trying to take over Gallia and not wacky school shenanigans, as the Academy cadets undertake missions to try and stop these forces now and then. The reason for Landseal partaking in these is that the army is still recovering from the war in the last game, and the militia is only to combat foreign invasions and not its own people. Wow, talk about throwing a lot of responsibility on mostly teenage students. Hopefully they'll get extra credit for this at least. So while I'm not a huge fan of how overly high school anime the sequel goes, I can say that the gameplay from Valkyria Chronicles did transition pretty well on the PSP. The Blitz battle system from the predecessor is used again with some new tweaks and features. With a switch to a handheld with less buttons, the controls, while still functional, will take a bit to get a hang of if you're used to how the first game handled. Since the PSP only has one analog stick, or nub, the camera is used with the L and R buttons when not aiming to look left and right, and the triangle and X buttons to look up and down. Because of that, square is used to enter aim mode, circle for actions such as crushing behind sandbags for cover or capturing bases, and start to end the character's movement. The analog nub is used to move characters in free aim, but the D-pad is also used for walking and finite aiming for better precision. Movement is fine for the most part, though tanks and APCs can get a bit cumbersome when trying to move them exactly to where you want them at times. Speaking of vehicles, not only do they make a return, but you have more options at your disposal. You can outfit your squad's vehicle as either an APC, which is a new addition to this game that is more nimble and can even carry and unload soldiers, or a tank. With both, you can change the body and turret types, cosmetics for small bonuses, and various armor and accessory pieces that can interact with or counter certain things on the battlefields once they're purchased. But there is a weight limit depending on the body type for how much you can equip. Oh, and you can name your vehicle too, but just with 6 letters as well, so all I could come up with is the L Jr., named after the Edelweiss from the first game. As for your infantry, you initially have 5 classes. Scouts have the most AP for movement, so they're good for running ahead to spot enemies and pick off weaker or exposed targets with their semi-auto rifles, but don't have the best defense or attack power. Shock troopers are the go-to anti-infantry units with submachine guns, but have less attack range and AP than scouts. Lancers are the anti-armor class, armed with rocket-launching lances and having hard defenses, especially against explosives, but they have limited ammo that only replenishes 1 round per turn while out in the field and are more vulnerable since they can't intercept or counterattack. Engineers are the main support class. While only armed with pistols, they carry large Ragnite for healing allies, restock limited ammo supplies for others, and can repair vehicles with spanners, the latter of which at least makes more sense than using cutters to magically fix tanks before. If only it were that easy to do that for cars. Finally, there's the new class, Armor Techs, which carry shields and melee weapons for close quarters combat. They can also remove landmines and repair destroyed sandbags, which the engineers in Valkyria Chronicles 1 did as well, but those duties are now divided between 2 classes in the sequel. Techs have the best defense and anti-personnel power, but are tricky to use efficiently. I find they are best to take out specific targets or bosses. As for the snipers from the first game, they are now a class you can upgrade to from scouts. Valkyria Chronicles 2 introduces a new class promotion system, where with credentials earned during missions, characters can change class to improve their stats. These branch out to 4 fully upgraded classes within that character's type of unit. With the exception of Ivan, who can actually be any class because he has high adaptive aptitude or some crap like that, provided you earn him what he needs for the advanced ones. This upgrade system does add a significant amount of customization to outfit your squad, as you can plan out different strategies for each new class. The only problem with it is that earning certain credits, specifically certificates and diplomas, are chance-based, meaning you can have characters only need a diploma to reach the 3rd class level, and even when you have them do as much as they can during the missions, they can get gypped out of the diploma and are given to a character that already has several, which means you have to pretty much luck out or make a sacrifice to the random drop gods. Bad games unfortunately don't net much favor from them though. In addition to credentials for contributing units, you can earn experience in Ducat, Gallia's currency, for each completed mission. And the less turns you take to finish, the higher the rank you earn for more XP and money in addition to specific enemy bonuses. Experience points are used to level up your classes at the drill ground, where you also upgrade characters' classes, and learn orders from Malkin or Alicia, who stop by the campus store now and then and are welcome sights from the previous game. Orders can also be earned from the drill sergeant once reaching certain levels during training. Much like the first Valkyria Chronicles, orders are special actions from Ivan and enemy commanders that boost various attributes or do certain actions for their soldiers at the cost of command points for their turn. However, it seems that in an attempt to balance these, most orders cost a lot more in 2. So much so that I barely used any outside of the medic request that only cost 2 CP to safely evacuate a fallen soldier. By the way, even if you don't get a medic to a shot down unit in time, no one ever dies. Even non-story crucial members only get hospitalized, which incapacitates them for 3 missions. It's certainly lower stakes than potentially losing a squad mate permanently in the first game, which I'm sad to say Aika was the only member I lost during my initial playthrough of that. Don't worry Aika, you'll always live on in Skies of Arcadia. That and Vice still stuck around and kicked Imperial ass at least. Money is used to purchase upgrades from the R&D building and newspapers and additional missions from the store. With the former, you can buy enhancements for your soldiers and vehicle, which also need resources that are gathered from completed missions. Not only that, but by eliminating aces during missions, which are special named units, you unlock plans for more parts and weaponry. Resources can also be used to make temporary coatings for a class. By successfully combining 2 resources, it will raise a stat for that selected class for the next mission. But if the 2 you mix is a failure, it will go down instead. Think of temporary coatings as eating food before a hunted monster hunter in a way. One last thing to mention in R&D is that if your vehicle does get destroyed in a mission, you actually need to cover repair costs in order to have it functional again. While upgrading in between missions behaves much like the first game, the mission structure is more open as you have more to do here in 2. Chapters are divided up in months as the game goes through 12 from January to December, but in each month you need to complete a few key missions before the story progression ones unlock. This is fine at first since tutorials during the first month or so make sense in a military school setting, but later on when things start escalating with their forces, it forces you to do 3 or 4 missions before the next major event, killing the pace. Most have you do the same few things like capture bases, eliminate all enemies, defend your base for a set amount of turns, which is also just kill everything if you want to get a good rank, collect scattered crates, and everyone's favorite, escort missions where you're stuck using a bare bones APC to get to a target. I do at least appreciate the small amount of variety to not make things too repetitive, but the story missions are more engaging. The rest just feel like filler so you can level up and upgrade more after a while. Though as the game does progress, we do go through a good assortment of areas to fight in, with later ones having effects that can reduce things like accuracy or AP, which the vehicle can counteract with the right shoulder attachments, but only negating that effect in the area it's in. Maps in Valkyria Chronicles 2 are now divided into areas, connected by corresponding camps that link them in order to stand by and then deploy your troops through to the next. This is probably a design choice to get around the PSP limitations, since you can only have up to 6 units between all areas and 5 in one, but this works in the game's favor as you now have to be more mindful of different areas as well, which leads to strategies involving linked camps too. Also new to 2's battlefields is the morale system meter, which goes up when you do well or down when not. And if it reaches 0, then the mission is over, but I personally never had that happen and didn't need to worry about it too much. Morale also factors in your squad members' potentials, which are characteristics that sometimes trigger giving a boost or reduction in something. The more positive morale you have, the more likely good potentials will activate over bad ones, but some can activate over specific circumstances regardless. As characters unlock more potentials, you can change them out to a small degree to suit your needs. Some of the best potentials, however, are unlocked once you partake in classmate missions. When using certain characters enough in battles, you unlock dialogue cutscenes to learn more about that character, and once the 3rd one shows up, you can go do their mission designed around them. Once completed, you solve whatever problem they had and a new potential unlocks or replaces a bad one, which gives you some incentive to do as well as fully develop some characters, some of which I thought were alright, while others, well, I think this image you may have seen floating around the internet speaks for itself.
That shape is delicious.
I bet it is, Marion. So in addition to classmate missions, you have 3 or 4 key missions every month, story missions, missions you can purchase at the store, and any other missions you didn't do, optional cutscenes in between missions that are mostly just anime school hijinks, earning titles you can add to the beginning and end of your squad name by defeating aces or other requirements, medals that also act as in-game achievements, and if that wasn't enough, when you finally do beat the game, you unlock post-game content of bonus characters and harder missions. Oh, and if you somehow want even more, there's additional characters, missions, and stickers you unlock with passcodes and the extras options, and then there's a $5 DLC you can buy from the PlayStation Network store with even more missions, and content overload! Sorry, while this game will certainly give you its money's worth, my main issue is that the amount of content is a little overwhelming, which pads the game out to be twice as long as the first game. Valkyria Chronicles 1 took me roughly over 30 hours to beat, while 2 took over 60. This was the longest game I played for a review so far, and this is coming from someone who's covering Tales of games. That's not to say I didn't like playing this game, I just wasn't expecting it to be that long with so much to offer. And that's not even counting the multiplayer. Yes, this game does have ad hoc multiplayer, but since that is local wireless and there's no infrastructure online, your best bet is to use ad hoc party on the PlayStation 3, provided you downloaded it before it was removed from the PlayStation Network store and have wired access to a router for your PS3. It was how I managed to play multiplayer thanks to fellow River City Gamers friends Shadow Snake and Angel Halo, and it may be the only way you could do this for Valkyria Chronicles 2 unless you miraculously know a local friend that has a PSP in this game too. The multiplayer comes in 2 flavors, playing missions cooperatively with up to 4 people, yeah, good luck getting 3 others for that, and 2-player versus. Co-op plays like you would expect, only with a few unique twists. You and your partner actually take turns at the same time, moving and taking action simultaneously. As such, you can implement cover attacks and buddy effects when attacking and moving together, respectively. As for versus, it's the standard affair of whoever can take out the other's base camp, which is fine if you felt the first game lacked that feature. Although be prepared for these to take quite a few turns if you and your opponent are proficient enough. Also, what's kind of funny is that in both modes, you and your friend can deploy the same characters, which I like to imagine leads to clone confusion.
Hey, who are you? I'm your clone. Who are you? My clone. Then who am I? You're not you. Who are you if I'm not me? I'm you. But I'm you. Oh, you're me.
The multiplayer is a fun enough addition to the series, but finding annoying people to play with might be a hassle. It's obvious this was targeted towards the ad hoc players of games like Monster Hunter in Japan, but here PSP ad hoc multiplayer is about as popular as Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts was to that fan base. And before you ask, yes, I did pledge to the ukulele Kickstarter and look forward to it. Nice to see the spiritual successor come through. Shoehorn timely reference aside, while a sequel does add new features and customization, I still had a hard time warming up to the characters and story because of the overdone school anime setting. But after getting past those moments, the narrative on the war against the rebels is alright as a follow-up, even if Welkin and Alicia are only supporting characters and most other characters in the first game are just cameos, mentions, or bonus characters. Though I still had a couple of irks with the story.
Without directly spoiling things, all I'll say is that I saw the plot twist with Yvonne's brother coming a mile away. Also, Rise of Valkyria Chronicles 2. Color blindness does not work that way! You'll know what I mean if you play the game up to that point.
If you aren't colorblind by this game's definition, then you'll at least appreciate the visuals, which by late PSP standards is pretty good and replicates the look of Valkyria Chronicles as best as it can. The 3D models and environments are a bit pixelated and grainy, but do the job with the handheld's hardware, even if there was the odd performance moment and the enemy AI doing some questionable things at times, but similar things happen in the PS3 version of the first game too, and are minor blemishes in both games. The rest of the graphics rely on 2D backgrounds and portraits akin to visual novels, which are drawn nicely enough, though some things like this pose from Yvonne I can't take seriously. I have a hard time trying to replicate that sitting down. There's also the occasional FMV animated cutscene that fits the anime aesthetic. These visual choices are for the PSP in mind, but I can't help but wish the canvas engine could be used to the fullest like in the last game. The sound design is similar in that regard too, replicated as best as it can on the PSP, but suffers a little from those setbacks as a result. Music is still quite good with a reprised composer, even if a few of the tracks are reused from the first game, but that's hardly a complaint since those were that good to begin with, so I don't mind hearing them again, albeit slightly compressed. And the original music made for the sequel is done just as well. Voice acting is decent enough, with some fully voiced scenes while others simply have short sound cues. And English is the only option as opposed to having both that and Japanese in the first game, so for all you subs over dubs people, you may be disappointed with that. Generally the English voices didn't bother me too much, but Yvonne's laugh soundbite is pretty annoying the more you hear it. Can you tell I didn't really like Yvonne that much? Although I can say is that I still enjoy Valkyria Chronicles 2 overall. It is impressive that the gameplay could be implemented pretty seamlessly with new features on the PSP, but it's held back just a little because of those limitations. That and being too anime for something that was already anime to begin with. It's those setbacks that makes the sequel not quite as good as the first Valkyria Chronicles in my opinion. It is still a good PSP game with a lot of content I do recommend just from the gameplay alone, but regardless of its quality, Valkyria Chronicles 2 sold poorly here. So much so that I don't even recall seeing physical copies out there in the wild where I live. I had to get my copy from eBay, which right now goes for around $20 to $30. But if you don't mind digital versions, download from the PS3 or PSP PlayStation Network stores is only $10. However, it's not on the PlayStation Vita or TV store as of this video, but you can play on those if you bought it from a PlayStation 3 and transfer the copy onto them from there. And because of the bad sales overseas, the third game, which was also on the PSP, didn't get released outside of Japan. That still didn't stop people from making a fan translation patch, so you can import 3 and play it that way. And even though the second game didn't do well, the recent Steam release of the first did. So in that regard, I hope Sega sees and realizes that North American gamers do like Valkyria Chronicles, and maybe we can see releases of 2 or even 3 as well. Although a new entry back on consoles like the PlayStation 4 would be nice. Hell, I even sell for releases or a new game on the Vita, even if those would sell just as well on that.
I'd say if you're a fan of Valkyria Chronicles, then you should at least check it out. And you could always do an anime stereotype drinking game if you find them annoying like I did, and don't mind a huge hangover the next day.
Blondeguygamer does not advocate irresponsible alcohol use for dumb drinking games involving video games.